When my son Bennett looked me in the eye and told me he hoped I'd choke on my own pride before the year was out, he had no idea I'd already found the folder hidden behind the false panel in his mother's writing desk. The one with her real signature on it, not the one he'd paid a man in a strip mall office to forge. What he did after that phone call was so calculated, so cold, that I stopped thinking of him as my son and started thinking of him as a problem to be solved. My name is Atticus Greaves. I'm 66 years old, and for 39 of those years I believed I had raised a decent man. I was wrong about that, for exactly as long as it took my wife to die. Marguerite passed on a Sunday morning in October, 11 months before any of this started, after a year and a half of fighting ovarian cancer, with more grace than I'll ever have for anything in my life. We'd been married 41 years. She ran the books for the small vineyard we'd built outside Denver. Heart-shallow cellars, 40 acres of grapes I used to think would outlive both of us, and she kept every ledger and handwriting so precise you could have used it to teach penmanship. I mention the handwriting because it matters later. It matters more than almost anything else in this story. Bennett is our only child. 40 years old when this began, divorced twice, a man who'd drifted through 6 or 7 careers without ever landing anywhere that stuck. Real estate for a while, then some kind of consulting thing I never fully understood, then nothing, for longer than I wanted to admit to myself. Marguerite used to say he just hadn't found his footing yet. I used to believe her. 7 months after we buried her, on the second Tuesday of May, Bennett drove up the gravel road to the house in a car I didn't recognize. Silver, expensive, the kind of car that announces itself before it's even in park, and walked into the kitchen wearing an expression I now understand was rehearsed. "Dad, we should talk about the estate," he said, like he was opening a business meeting. He sat at the same table where his mother used to do crossword puzzles on Sunday mornings, and he set down a leather folio I'd never seen before. "What estate, Bennett? Everything went to me. Your mother and I settled that years ago. That's the thing." He slid a document across the table, his fingers tapping it twice for emphasis. "Turns out Mom updated things before she passed. I've got it all here. The vineyard, the house, the investment accounts. She wanted it structured a certain way. For tax reasons, mostly. I want to tell you I felt something dramatic in that moment, some lightning bolt of premonition. I didn't. What I felt was confusion, the ordinary kind, the kind you feel when someone tells you a fact about your own life that doesn't match your memory of it. Your mother never mentioned restructuring anything to me. She didn't want to upset you while she was sick. She talked to a lawyer about it privately. Look," he tapped the paper again, her signature's right there. Notarized and everything. I picked it up. It did look like Marguerite's hand. The loops were close, the slant was close. But I had read her handwriting every single day for 4 decades, on grocery lists and birthday cards and the margins of books she was reading, and something in my chest went cold before my mind caught up to why. "I need to look this over properly," I told him. "There's nothing to look over, Dad. It's done. I've already started moving the vineyard's operating accounts into a trust under my name. It's cleaner that way, for the harvest season. You'll still get a stipend, obviously. A stipend. From my own vineyard. From the land Marguerite and I had cleared by hand the first 3 summers we owned it, when we couldn't afford to hire anyone. David, if this is legitimate, I will honor it," I said, and then caught myself, because his name isn't David, it's Bennett, but somehow in the moment of speaking I'd nearly called him by the name of a stranger, which tells you something about how far he already felt from me. "But if there's anything wrong with these papers, you understand what that means." He laughed, not a nervous laugh, a laugh with teeth in it. "What it means, Dad, is that you're 66 and grieving, and maybe not thinking as clearly as you used to. Mom trusted me with this. She knew I'd handle it better than some sentimental old man who still keeps her reading glasses on the nightstand." I do still keep her reading glasses on the nightstand. I hadn't told him that. He must have seen them on one of his visits and filed it away as a weapon for later. That night I sat alone in the room Marguerite used as her office, surrounded by her ledgers, and I started to understand that the cold feeling in my chest had a name. It was called doubt, and it was about to become the most useful tool I had. Over the next month, Bennett's life transformed in ways that should have embarrassed him, and instead seemed to fill him with pride. He leased a glass-walled condo downtown. He bought himself a watch I later learned cost $41,000. $1,000 for every year of his mother's marriage to me, though I doubt that irony ever once occurred to him. He posted pictures online from restaurants where the tasting menu alone cost more than I used to pay my vineyard crew for a week. Each photograph was a small wound, not because of the money, because every dollar he spent was a dollar that should have been buying new oak barrels, or replacing the irrigation lines on the East Block, or, God help me, the thought kept circling back, paying for the kind of headstone Marguerite deserved, and that I still hadn't been able to bring myself to choose. He came back to the house on the second Friday of June, this time with a different agenda. He walked through the rooms like an appraiser, running his hand along the back of Marguerite's reading chair, as if pricing it for auction. Dad, I think it's time we talked seriously about you downsizing. This place is 40 acres and 4,000 square feet for one man. It doesn't make sense anymore. This is my home, Bennett. I built this with your mother. Sentiment doesn't pay property taxes. He said it so flatly, so rehearsed, that I understood he'd practiced the line somewhere, maybe in the mirror of that glass condo. I've already had a realtor walk the grounds. We could clear close to $2 million for the property alone, separate from the business assets. I repeated. Well, I could. Legally, under the new trust documents, the land's mine to manage. But I'm not heartless. I'd set you up somewhere comfortable, a nice retirement community. $60,000 a year, maybe, for your expenses. That's more than fair. Something shifted in me at that moment that I can only describe as a switch flipping from grief to strategy. I had spent 40 years negotiating grape contracts with distributors who would have eaten me alive if I'd let emotion run the table. I knew how to be patient when patience was a weapon. Let me think about it, I said, calm as still water. Don't think too long. The market's good right now. After he left, I drove 40 minutes to the office of Lucian Hartfield, the notary who had handled every piece of paper Marguerite and I had signed since before Bennett was born. Lucian had known her since she was 26 years old. Atticus, he said, rising from behind his desk when I walked in unannounced. How are you holding up? Lucian, I need you to tell me something, and I need the truth, not the kind version. Did Marguerite update her estate documents in the last year of her life? Did she sign anything naming Bennett as primary beneficiary of the vineyard or the house? He went very still. Atticus, the last document Marguerite signed in this office was in February, 14 months before she passed. You were named sole beneficiary of everything, the land, the business, the accounts. She was emphatic about it. She told me herself she wanted you protected first, and that Bennett would inherit from you when the time came, not from her directly. She was specific about why. Why? Lucian hesitated, the way people hesitate when they're about to repeat something painful that was told to them in confidence. She said Bennett wasn't ready. Her words. She said he needed more time to grow into responsibility before he was handed that kind of money outright. I sat in the chair across from his desk and felt the floor of my life tilt sideways. He showed me a document, notarized, dated after that, supposedly from March, this year, 4 months after she died. Lucian's face went pale in a way I'd never seen on him before. Atticus, that's not possible. I have her original. I have the video recording of the signing. She insisted on it. She said she wanted no ambiguity given the diagnosis. Bring me whatever he showed you. Today, if you can. That night, in Marguerite's office, I went through every drawer until I found, behind a panel in the back of her writing desk, that I hadn't opened in a year, the folder with her real will, her real signature, dated and witnessed, and exactly the way Lucian had described it. I laid it next to the photocopy Bennett had given me and studied them under the desk lamp until my eyes burned. The differences were small, but they were there. Marguerite always crossed her sevens with a single firm stroke, a habit from a year she'd spent doing bookkeeping in Germany in her 20s. The forged document's sevens were uncrossed. She dated documents with the month spelled in full, never abbreviated. This one read Mar 2024, and then I found the detail that turned my stomach to ice. Marguerite died on the 11th of October. The forged will Bennett handed me was dated the 19th of March, 5 months after her death. My son had forged a dead woman's signature onto a document, dated months after her funeral, gambling that grief had made me too careless to check. For 3 days I didn't sleep more than a few hours at a stretch. I called in a man named Foster Lynn, an estate attorney a colleague from the Colorado Wine Growers Association had recommended years earlier for a contract dispute. Foster looked at both documents in his downtown office with the focused stillness of a surgeon. This is forgery, plain and simple, he said. And given the dates, I'd guess he didn't even realize the error he made. People panicking after a parent's death often slip on small details, the date being the most common. What can we do? Several things, and we can do them fast. Forged document, fraud, possibly identity misrepresentation if he used it to access accounts. We freeze everything he's touched. We bring in a handwriting expert to make it airtight. And given his spending pattern, I suspect we'll find he's already moved money he had no legal right to move. We did bring in an expert, a meticulous, soft-spoken forensic document examiner named Dr. Ansel Vargo, who spent 4 hours in my dining room with a magnifying loupe and an ultraviolet lamp, comparing Marguerite's authentic signatures against the forged one letter by letter. Whoever did this had access to genuine samples and a steady hand, Dr. Vargo told us afterward. But the muscle memory isn't there. Real handwriting has a rhythm built over decades. This was traced, slowly, by someone trying to imitate a rhythm they didn't actually possess. It's conclusive. I'd stake my reputation on it in any courtroom in the country. While Foster prepared the legal filings, I began my own quiet investigation into how, exactly, Bennett had pulled it off, because I needed to understand the scope of the betrayal before I could decide what to do about it. I remembered, with a clarity that made me sick, the week before Marguerite died, when Bennett had insisted on staying overnight at the hospital so I could go home and rest. "You've barely slept in 5 days, Dad. Go shower. Eat something. I've got Mom tonight." I had thanked him for his thoughtfulness. I had told people at her funeral what a devoted son he'd been in those final days. He had spent those final nights photographing every document in her hospital bag, every signature he could find, building a template for the fraud he'd commit 5 months later. When I called the bank where Marguerite and I had kept our joint operating accounts for the vineyard, the branch manager, a careful, sympathetic woman named Marcia Quill, confirmed what I already suspected. "Mr. Greaves, your son presented a power of attorney document along with the will you've described, and used it to open access to 2 of your joint accounts. Over the past 6 weeks, roughly $1.3 million has moved out of those accounts into accounts under his own name. I had Foster file the criminal complaint that same week. Forgery, fraud, theft by deception, the whole catalog Colorado law allows for a case like this. The judge granted an emergency freeze on every account connected to Bennett within 48 hours, faster than I'd dared hope. What followed was, I'll admit, the most methodical week of my life since the harvest seasons of my 40s, when I used to run the whole vineyard on nothing but coffee and stubbornness. I called the leasing office of his glass-walled condo and explained, with documentation, that the deposit and rent had been paid with funds obtained through fraud. The lease was voided within a day, and Bennett was given 72 hours to vacate. I called the dealership where he'd financed that obnoxious silver car and explained the same thing. It was repossessed from the underground garage before he even noticed his key fob had stopped working. I canceled the 3 credit cards I had personally guaranteed for him years earlier, back when he was 26 and just starting out, and I still believed in him without reservation. By the end of that week, every door he'd built for himself with stolen money had been quietly, legally shut. Then I went to see Lucian Hartfield one final time, and together we rewrote my own will completely. Bennett was removed as beneficiary of everything: the vineyard, the house, my life insurance, the modest pension I'd built over 4 decades of running a business that mostly broke even, and occasionally, in good years, thrived. In his place, I established the Marguerite Greaves Memorial Trust, which would fund ovarian cancer research at the same hospital that had treated her, and would also, this part mattered to me, provide scholarships for young people from agricultural families who wanted to study viticulture but couldn't afford it. It felt like the only way to make something living grow out of what he'd tried to destroy. The calls started the following Tuesday morning, and they did not stop. "Dad, there's something wrong with my account. The app says it's frozen. Do you know anything about this?" His voice still had that note of breezy confidence in it, like a man checking on a minor technical glitch. I let the silence stretch before I answered. "Bennett, have you considered the possibility that the problem isn't with the bank?" A pause. "What does that mean?" "It means I found the real will, the one your mother actually signed. It means I know about the forged document, the fake dates, the access you got to her hospital room the night before she died. It means there's a criminal complaint with your name on it sitting in front of a Denver judge right now." The silence that followed lasted so long I genuinely thought the call had dropped. "You're insane," he finally said, his voice climbing. You can't do this to your own son. You did this to your own father, Bennett. I'm only doing the paperwork. Over the next 2 days, he called me. I started keeping count almost as a coping mechanism, the way you count something mundane to keep your mind from the larger horror. 209 times. He tried threats first. Then he tried lawyers, hiring one with what little cash he had left, until the lawyer figured out he couldn't be paid from a frozen account and quietly withdrew. He tried family, calling Marguerite's younger brother, my brother-in-law Otis Render, to spin a story about misunderstandings and an overreacting grieving widower. I had already sent Otis the forensic report. That call did not go the way Bennett hoped. By the fourth day, the calls had changed in character entirely. No more threats, no more spin, just a voice growing thinner and more frightened with every hour. A man discovering, piece by piece, exactly how much he had thrown away. Dad, I haven't eaten since yesterday. They wouldn't let me back into the condo. I don't have anywhere to sleep tonight. A pause, and then quieter. I'm scared. You should have thought about consequences before you forged your dead mother's signature. I know that now. Please, can we talk in person? Not like this, not over the phone. I told him no, twice before I finally agreed, mostly because I realized I needed to hear, face to face, whatever explanation he had, if only so I could finally close the door on this chapter of my life with full understanding instead of a hole shaped like unanswered questions. He came to the house 6 days after that first frozen account call, and I almost didn't recognize him. The polished, watch-wearing man who'd sat at my kitchen table in May was gone. In his place was someone hollow-eyed, unshaven, wearing the same clothes he'd clearly slept in more than once. Dad, he said from the porch, because I made him stay outside the door, please, I came to tell you everything. Not the version I gave you before. The truth. Then tell it. He'd told it sitting on the porch steps because I didn't let him in, and the story came out of him in pieces like something being pulled loose by force. He'd had debts. Not gambling, as I'd half expected from his erratic spending, though there was some of that too, but something worse, in a way. He'd put a substantial amount of his own savings, years earlier, into a friend's startup that collapsed, and then, trying to recover the loss, he'd borrowed from a private lender whose terms turned predatory fast. By the time his mother got sick, he owed nearly $300,000 to people who did not send polite reminder letters. I told myself I'd just borrow against the inheritance early, he said, staring at his hands. Just to cover what I owed. I figured once it was legally mine anyway, it wouldn't really be stealing. And then I saw Mom's actual will, the one that left everything to you first, and I panicked. I found a guy online who said he could make a document look authentic for $8,000. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself a lot of things. And the rest? The watch, the car, the restaurants? He flinched, like the question physically hurt. Once the debt was paid off, there was still so much money left, more than I'd ever had access to in my life. I think some part of me wanted to prove I deserved it, that I wasn't the disappointment everyone thought I was. So I spent it like proving a point. I know how insane that sounds now. And when you told me you hoped I'd choke on my own pride, was that part of proving a point too? He put his face in his hands. That's the part I can't forgive myself for. I was scared you were starting to suspect something, and I thought if I was cruel enough, you'd back off out of hurt instead of digging further. I am so ashamed of that. More ashamed of that than anything else I did. I want to tell you I felt nothing in that moment, that the calculating, patient version of myself that had spent 2 weeks dismantling his stolen life remained perfectly intact. That wouldn't be honest. Some old, stubborn paternal nerve in me ached, hearing him cry on my porch steps the way he used to cry as a boy after a bad fall. But I also remembered Marguerite's actual handwriting, real and warm and trusting, on a document he had defaced with a forgery built on her grave. The ache and the resolve sat side by side, and I let them. What happens to you now? I asked. My public defender thinks, with the confession and the restitution already recovered through the freeze, I'll likely get probation instead of prison time. Community service. A financial penalty I'll be paying off for years. And, he hesitated, I want to go into a program. For the financial recklessness. The borrowing, the spending, all of it. I think there's something broken in me about money that goes back further than this year, and I don't want to be this person anymore. A week later, I got a call from a man named Dr. Roman Ashby, who ran a residential financial behavior and addiction recovery program 2 hours outside Denver. Bennett had checked himself in voluntarily and asked at the center to call me, not to ask for money, but to ask if I'd be willing to fund the program's fee, given that every dollar he'd once had was now frozen, recovered, or gone. I thought about it for 2 days before I called back. When I did, I laid out terms the way I used to lay out terms in a vineyard contract negotiation, clearly with no room for misreading. I'll pay for 6 months, in full. During that time, he doesn't contact me. Not a call, not a letter, nothing through a third party. At the end of it, I want a full professional assessment of his progress. Only then will I decide whether there's any basis for further contact. Those are firm conditions, Mr. Greaves. They're the only conditions I have left to give him. The 6 months that followed were the strangest, quietest stretch of my life since Marguerite died. I threw myself into the vineyard in a way I hadn't since I was younger. Out among the vines at dawn, walking rows I knew better than the lines on my own hands. I started teaching a Saturday class at the community college on small business viticulture, something Marguerite had been encouraging me to do for years before she got sick. I joined a grief support group at the church, mostly to humor a neighbor who kept inviting me, and ended up going every week for reasons I still can't fully explain except that it helped. Every month, Dr. Ashby sent a brief clinical update. Bennett had completed an intensive course on financial accountability. Bennett had begun working a paid maintenance job within the facility, putting a portion of every paycheck toward the restitution fund the court had ordered. Bennett had, in his 4th month, started attending a weekly group specifically focused on family repair, though he had no family present to repair anything with yet. He'd simply chosen to do the work in advance, on faith that the opportunity might someday come. In the 5th month, I established the scholarship arm of the Marguerite Greaves Memorial Trust officially, awarding its first grant to a young woman from a struggling family farm in the western part of the state who wanted to study enology. I gave a short speech at the small ceremony, and I found myself saying, without planning to, that grief doesn't have to calcify into bitterness if you let it become purpose instead. I don't know where that line came from. I think it came from Marguerite, somehow, the way her best ideas always seemed to. At the end of the 6th month, Dr. Ashby called and told me Bennett had completed the program, and that in 20 years of running it, he ranked among the small handful of patients who'd shown the most consistent, unglamorous, hard-won change. Not dramatic breakthroughs, just the slow daily work of becoming someone different. Has he asked about contacting me? Never once, Mr. Greaves. He's been told from the start it might never happen, and he's accepted that fully. He's never pushed. I drove out to the facility myself on a clear morning in late autumn, almost exactly a year after Bennett first sat at my kitchen table, with a folio full of lies. When he walked into the meeting room, I needed a moment to recognize him. He'd lost the soft, indulgent weight of his glass condo months. His hands were rough from real labor. There was no trace of the practiced confidence he used to wear like a second skin. "Dad," he said simply, no embrace, no performance, just the word. We talked for 2 hours. He told me, in plain, unembellished sentences, about the daily routine of the past 6 months, the maintenance work, the financial classes, the long walks he'd started taking each evening to sit with thoughts he used to drown out with spending. He told me he'd been sending $5 a week, all he could afford on his program stipend, to the Marguerite Greaves Memorial Trust, anonymously, because he wanted to give something back to her name even if I never found out. I had found out. Dr. Ashby had mentioned it in passing months earlier, and I hadn't said anything until now. "I know," I told him. "I've known for a while." Something in his face broke open, not into tears exactly, but into a kind of relief I hadn't seen on him in years, maybe ever. "I'm not asking you to trust me again, Dad. I know that's not something I get to ask for. I just wanted you to know I haven't stopped trying, even with no guarantee anyone was watching." I didn't give him an answer that day. I told him I needed time, the same words he'd once mocked me with at my own kitchen table, though I doubt he remembered the echo. But 2 weeks later, I sent him a letter. Not a phone call, not a visit, a letter, because some things deserve to be set down in ink and considered carefully, offering limited contact. A monthly visit, supervised at first with the understanding that trust, once broken the way he'd broken it, isn't restored. It's rebuilt, slowly, brick by careful brick, and there's no shortcut through that work, only the long way around. It's been 8 months since that letter. Bennett works full-time now at a hardware supply company in town, the most ordinary job he's ever held, and by his own account, the first one that's ever made him proud. He still sends his $5 to the trust every week, though I've told him he doesn't need to anymore. He says he wants to. The vineyard is thriving. We had our best harvest in 6 years this fall, and for the first time since Marguerite died, I stood among the vines at the end of the season and felt something close to peace instead of just absence. Her trust has funded 4 scholarships now, 4 young people learning to coax good things out of difficult soil, which feels like exactly the kind of legacy she would have wanted, far more than any inheritance handed down whole and unearned ever could have been. Bennett came up for the harvest dinner this year, sitting at the far end of the table, quiet, helping clear plates without being asked. It wasn't the relationship we had before. It may never be. But watching him stack those plates carefully, the way his mother used to, I understood that some things don't have to be restored to their original shape to still be worth keeping. Sometimes what grows back is different from what was lost, and that doesn't make it any less real.